Not every machine from the 1960s turned out the way the brochures promised. Some broke down far too soon. Some drained bank accounts faster than fuel tanks. And a few became infamous among farmers who just wanted a reliable partner in the field. These tractors arrived with big expectations: more power, modern designs, smoother transmissions. But what they delivered was often the opposite: overheating engines, poor engineering, constant repairs, and a whole lot of regret. In this video, we're diving into 15 of the most hated tractors of the 1960s. Some came from brands you'd expect. Others might surprise you. And by the time we get to the final 3, you'll understand why even the most loyal fans walked away shaking their heads. Let's get started. The John Deere 2010 was launched with high hopes in the early 1960s. Marketed as part of Deere's bold New Generation series, it offered live PTO, modern styling, and multiple configurations. On paper, it looked like a winner. In practice, it quickly gained a different reputation. Its biggest flaw was the hydraulic system, overly complex and prone to failure. Repairs often required splitting the tractor in half, even for routine issues. The engine suffered from poor oiling, and the transmission had trouble staying in gear. Farmers expected progress, but got frustration. One farmer said his 2010 was more useful holding up fence wire than pulling a plow. Even die-hard Deere fans warned others to stay away. It remains a rare black mark in an otherwise respected legacy. A reminder that not every green machine was golden. The Ford 6000 Commander was meant to be a statement. Introduced in the early 60s, it featured Ford's first 6-cylinder engine and a futuristic look. It also came with the ambitious Select O speed transmission. But it didn't take long for that transmission to earn a bad name. The Select O speed system was jerky, unreliable, and expensive to fix. Many tractors were recalled, and others spent more time in the shop than in the field. Engine problems followed, including overheating and oil leaks. What was billed as high-tech quickly became high-maintenance. Farmers called it Ford's $4,000 mistake. Even after updates, the damage to its reputation stuck. For many, the 6000 was proof that flashy features mean nothing without reliability. Ambition alone doesn't plow fields. The Alice Chalmers 190 XT looked powerful and aggressive, with enough horsepower to compete in the growing high-power market. It was fast, strong, and well-liked at first. But early models had a serious flaw. They were simply too much engine for the frame beneath them. The transmission and rear-end components were carried over from smaller models. Under heavy load, they failed badly. Gears stripped, axles cracked, and repairs piled up. What started as a promising row crop machine turned into a mechanical gamble. Many farmers learned the hard way that big horsepower means nothing without proper support. Later versions improved, but the early 19010 XT left a scar. It became a classic case of pushing too far, too fast. Tough looks, fragile heart. The International Harvester 460 arrived in 1958 as part of a fresh new lineup. It looked modern and promised more power than the popular Farmall models. But under the surface, things didn't hold up. The drivetrain was simply not built for the engine's output. IH reused components from older, smaller tractors, and the result was predictable. Final drives and rear ends failed far too early, often under normal use. Repairs were expensive and frustrating, especially for small farmers. Reliability became a major concern. To make matters worse, the narrow front end made it unstable on hills. What was meant to be a modern workhorse became a cautionary tale. Farmers expected progress and got shortcuts. For many, the 460 was a letdown in a shiny wrapper. The Massey Ferguson 1155 was big, bold, and loud. With a 540 cubic inch V8 diesel engine, it promised serious power for row crop farming. On paper, it looked like a home run, but that roaring engine quickly became its downfall. Overheating was a constant problem, especially under heavy load. Cracked heads, blown gaskets, and warped components were all too common. The fuel system was temperamental, and maintenance was expensive. Many farmers regretted ever trusting the V8. Some even swapped in inline 6 engines just to keep the chassis useful. The 1155 had presence, no doubt, but its performance couldn't match its promise. It was a tractor that sounded strong, but died young. The Oliver 1855 was supposed to be a flagship model, packed with power and turbocharged performance. Its Waukesha 310 diesel engine delivered around 105 horsepower. Impressive for the time. But that same engine became its biggest weakness. It simply couldn't handle the boost. Overheating, cracked heads, and spun bearings were common complaints. Oil temperatures ran dangerously high, and the weak oil cooler didn't help. To make things worse, the oil pressure gauge was often inaccurate. By the time problems were noticed, it was too late. Many owners felt betrayed by a tractor that looked great but failed under pressure. It had potential, but not the durability to back it up. For some, the 1855 was more heartbreak than horsepower. A sharp machine that couldn't take the heat. The Minneapolis Moline M670 Super aimed to compete with the bigger names of the decade. It had decent horsepower, solid styling, and a reputation for raw pulling strength. But beneath the surface, things didn't run as smoothly. Farmers quickly learned it had quirks. The hydraulic system was weak and prone to failure under load. The engine, while strong, produced excessive vibration that caused long-term wear. Parts weren't always easy to find, and repairs took time. Mechanics often dreaded seeing one roll into the shop. It wasn't a complete failure, but it never lived up to expectations. The M670 Super worked until it didn't. And when it broke hard. For many, it was more frustration than force. The Case 930 Comfort King came with a bold name and an even bolder look. It promised comfort, power, and reliability for farmers working long hours. But early models delivered a much rougher experience than expected. The ride was anything but smooth. The suspension was stiff, and the controls weren't exactly user-friendly. Many farmers complained about the transmission being clunky and hard to shift. Some parts were prone to wear under stress, especially in colder climates. Comfort was more of a marketing term than a reality. Despite its strong engine, the 930 felt dated even during its prime. Later versions improved, but the first models left a bitter taste. Farmers expected a king. They got a brute, a tractor that worked hard, but not without complaint. The David Brown 880 Select-O-Matic was meant to bring smart hydraulic control to smaller farms. It introduced a more advanced system that let farmers switch between draft, position, and mixed control. But what sounded modern on paper turned into a headache in practice. The Select-O-Matic hydraulics were difficult to calibrate and quick to fail if not handled just right. Many farmers found themselves constantly adjusting or troubleshooting the system. When it worked, it was impressive. But getting there took patience most didn't have. Add in spotty dealer support and inconsistent parts availability, and frustration grew fast. The 880 had potential, but too much complexity for the average user. It taught many farmers a lesson. Sometimes, simpler is better. The Deutz D 8006 brought German engineering to American soil with confidence. It featured an air-cooled engine and a compact, efficient design that worked well in Europe. But once it hit the dusty fields of the American Midwest, Things didn't go as planned. The air-cooled engine struggled in hot, dusty conditions, especially during long harvest days. Local mechanics were unfamiliar with the setup, and parts weren't always easy to source. Even basic repairs turned into time-consuming tasks. What worked in Germany didn't translate well. Farmers admired the innovation, but didn't have time for complications. The D8006 wasn't a bad machine. It was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. In the US, it became a reminder that not every great idea survives the dust and heat of real farming. The Fiat 640 looked like a solid, no-frills workhorse. It was compact, efficient, and affordable, making it attractive to small farms across the US. But being an import, it brought challenges that many farmers didn't see coming until it was too late. Parts compatibility was a constant issue. Basic components like filters, seals, and fittings didn't always match local standards. Mechanics unfamiliar with the design often refused to work on it. Even experienced owners struggled with inconsistent manuals and vague instructions. The Fiat 640 wasn't a bad machine at its core, but owning one felt like working in isolation. Without proper support, breakdowns became ordeals. What started as a budget-friendly choice often ended as a source of daily stress. The Zetor 5511 arrived as a rugged, budget-friendly tractor from Eastern Europe. It promised durability and simplicity, appealing to farmers looking for a no-nonsense machine. But once it hit the fields, it became clear that toughness wasn't everything. The controls were stiff, the clutch was heavy, and the gear shifting felt more like a wrestling match. Comfort was barely considered, and cab ergonomics were an afterthought. While it could handle basic tasks, operating it day after day wore people down. Parts were available, but quality varied, and repairs often took longer than expected. Some owners made it work, but many gave up. The 5511 proved that durability without usability can still be a deal-breaker. The Leyland 154 was a small British-built tractor aimed at light-duty farm work. Its compact size and low price made it appealing to hobby farmers and smaller operations. But once put to use, many owners realized it was too light for real demands. With underwhelming power and limited lifting capacity, it struggled with anything beyond basic chores. The engine was noisy, and the ride was rough, even on flat ground. Transmission issues were common, especially in older units. While some appreciated its simplicity, others saw it as underbuilt and overpriced. It may have looked practical in the brochure, but in the field, the 154 felt more like a lawn tractor with an attitude than a true farm tool. The Long 445 was an Eastern European import sold under the Long name in the US during the 1960s and 70s. At first glance, it seemed like a great value: simple mechanics, decent power, and an affordable price tag. But the problems started after the sale. Dealer support was inconsistent, and parts were often hard to find. Manuals were vague, and even basic repairs became frustrating. Some tractors ran fine, while others felt like they were built on a Monday morning. Quality control was all over the place. Farmers bought the 445 to save money, but often paid more in downtime and repairs. It wasn't the worst tractor ever made, but it rarely inspired confidence. In the end, it became a lesson in why low cost doesn't always mean high value. The Belarus MTZ-50 was built like a tank and priced to move, which caught the attention of many American farmers. It came with four-wheel drive, decent horsepower, and a rugged look. But once in the field, the experience was anything but smooth. It was tough to use, and even tougher to fix. The controls were awkward, the clutch was stiff, and the cab felt like an afterthought. Wiring issues were common, and finding parts turned into a scavenger hunt. Manuals were poorly translated, adding confusion to frustration. Simple tasks became exhausting. Some farmers made it work, but most regretted the purchase. The MTZ-50 proved that strength without refinement isn't enough. It might survive Siberia, but it didn't survive Middle America. A tractor remembered more for struggle than service. The Mahindra 4110 entered the U.S. market in the early 2000s with big promises. It offered four-wheel drive, 41 horsepower, and a competitive price. On paper, it looked like a compact workhorse, but in practice, it brought more problems than power. The PTO system was unreliable and often failed under load. Cold starts were difficult, especially in northern climates. Electrical issues were frequent, with ignition problems frustrating many owners. Some machines ran fine, until they didn't. Parts availability was hit or miss, and dealer support varied widely. Owners found themselves improvising fixes for basic issues. The 4110 didn't fail because it lacked potential. It failed because it made reliability feel like a gamble. The Deutz D16006 was a German-built powerhouse released in the late 1960s. With around 160 horsepower and an air-cooled engine, it aimed to impress large-scale farmers. But in North America, it never found its place. The tech was advanced, but support was lacking. Its size and power were overkill for many farms, and its electronics confused most mechanics. The air-cooled system didn't perform well in dusty conditions. When something failed, parts were expensive and manuals hard to follow. Downtime became a frequent guest. Despite solid engineering, it felt out of sync with the market. Farmers needed reliability, not complexity. The D16006 ended up being admired from a distance, but rarely trusted in the field. It closed out the 1960s with more potential than payoff. Which of these tractors do you think deserved the hate? Or was one of them unfairly judged? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more videos about real machines.